When an emperor died, life inside the palace could change in an instant. For women of the harem, it might mean exile or confinement. For male concubines, favored attendants who had served the ruler closely, it could mean something far worse. Without the ruler's protection, they stood exposed to rival factions and sudden dismissal. Some were quietly removed, others vanished from the record entirely. Their position, once a mark of privilege, became a target. To understand why, we must see who these men were, how they lived, and why the death of a single person could so swiftly determine their fate. In several imperial traditions across Asia and the Middle East, the ruler's household was a vast, intricate system. It was not simply a personal residence, it was a political machine. The harem, often imagined purely as a space for women, in reality included a variety of figures: administrators, entertainers, and in some cases, male concubines. In the Ottoman Topkapi Palace, eunuchs from across the empire were trained from youth to serve in roles that blended ceremony, security, and personal service. Training could last years, involving language instruction, religious education, and rigorous drills in palace etiquette. They learned how to address royalty, when to speak, and even how to move through the palace without drawing attention. In Ming and Qing China, recruitment could come through tribute systems, with young boys from frontier regions brought to the capital for castration and training, where they learned music, calligraphy, military drill, and the subtleties of court ritual. These men, usually eunuchs, or otherwise chosen for their loyalty and isolation from outside family ties, held unique positions. They could be musicians, poets, or confidants. In the Mughal court, some acted as cultural patrons, commissioning art and architecture in the ruler's name, while in Safavid Persia, eunuchs served as intermediaries between the Shah and foreign envoys. Sometimes they were assigned to guard the women of the harem. Sometimes they became personal favorites of the ruler himself. The cultures that employed such roles varied in how openly they acknowledged them, but the reality of their existence is recorded in court documents, travelers' accounts, and occasionally scandalous rumors. Joseon, Korea, while generally avoiding such practices, still employed select attendants in roles that carried parallels, including managing royal documents and overseeing palace rituals. Daily life for these men was dictated by an exacting schedule that demanded both discipline and adaptability. They might rise well before dawn, often to the sound of gongs or drums marking the start of the palace day, to supervise the cleaning of the ruler's private chambers and corridors, ensuring that every surface gleamed and every object was in its precise place. Preparing ceremonial garments was a meticulous task, requiring careful handling of silks, embroideries, and jewels. A mistake here could be seen as a sign of disrespect. They might then arrange the ruler's private audience hall, positioning cushions, incense burners, and symbolic objects according to protocol. Those with musical, poetic, or artistic skills could be called upon at any moment to entertain during private gatherings, sometimes performing for hours to lift the ruler's mood. Trusted favorites had even more delicate duties: reading sensitive letters aloud, drafting responses, or delivering verbal instructions to senior officials, all requiring absolute accuracy and discretion. Between these tasks, they might be dispatched to inspect other parts of the palace, check on visiting dignitaries, or escort guests through secure corridors. Religious obligations were woven into this rhythm. In Islamic courts, eunuchs often accompanied the ruler to prayers, maintaining solemn decorum, while in Confucian China, they took part in seasonal state rituals, from ancestor offerings to imperial sacrifices. Meals, rest, and personal time were tightly regulated, and any lapse in readiness could draw reprimand. The combination of service, ceremony, and constant vigilance created a life that was both privileged in proximity to power and exhausting in its relentless demands. The death of a ruler was not only a moment of grief, it was a crisis. In the structured but volatile world of palace politics, a power vacuum could be dangerous for anyone tied to the previous regime. Male concubines, by their very nature, represented the private, intimate world of the late ruler. Their knowledge of personal affairs, their closeness, and their symbolic link to the deceased could make them both valuable and dangerous in the eyes of the new power. This was especially true when succession disputes arose, as seen in several Ottoman transitions where eunuchs were accused of influencing factional politics. In some courts, the arrival of a new ruler meant the immediate removal of the old ruler's personal attendants. This was not always out of cruelty, but rather as a political precaution. A concubine who had enjoyed the ruler's ear might be seen as a potential source of intrigue. In the Qing dynasty, for example, there were strict court protocols for what happened to members of the imperial household after an emperor's death, and male attendants could be reassigned, retired, or quietly dismissed. In Mughal India, records from Akbar's court indicate that some attendants were sent to provincial assignments far from the capital, often under the guise of honorable postings. But in other traditions, the measures were far more severe. In Yuan China, certain attendants could be required to follow the ruler in death, echoing ancient burial practices and underscoring the belief that their service was inseparable from their master's life. The Ottoman Empire offers one of the most well-documented examples of how palace service could be both a privilege and a peril. The inner palace was staffed by hundreds of eunuchs who managed everything from ceremonial events to the education of princes. Some were close personal companions of the Sultan. While many survived transitions of power, there were times when a change of ruler meant mass dismissals or transfers to distant provinces. The fear was simple. A man who had the trust of the previous sultan might not be loyal to the next. Archival orders from the 17th century record mass reassignments within weeks of a new ruler's accession. Contemporary European envoys noted these abrupt shifts in their letters, remarking on how swiftly familiar faces vanished from court. In the Abbasid Caliphate, chroniclers recorded instances where the death of a caliph led to purges within the harem and the attendant staff. This was especially true if the succession was contested. Rival claimants to the throne could view the late ruler's favorites as political liabilities. In some cases, attendants were exiled. In others, they vanished from the record entirely, suggesting imprisonment or execution. Al-Masudi's accounts hint at summary removals justified as safeguarding the dynasty. In Ming China, imperial eunuchs could rise to extraordinary power. Some controlled vast networks of information and resources. Their influence, however, was tied directly to the emperor's favor. Without it, they could fall as swiftly as they rose. When an emperor died, his personal eunuchs were often investigated by the incoming court. Accusations of corruption or overstepping their role were common charges used to justify their removal. The fate of the infamous eunuch Wei Chongxian, whose downfall came after the death of the Tianqi emperor, is a stark example of how political purges could be framed as moral reform. The Mughal Empire in India, too, saw eunuchs play important roles as guardians of the zenana, the women's quarters. They could act as diplomats, messengers, and cultural patrons, yet their security depended on the goodwill of the ruler and his immediate heirs. A concubine or favorite without a powerful patron in the new regime might find himself reassigned to a provincial post or quietly pensioned off. In many courts, the ruler's death triggered a tightly choreographed series of rituals. Beginning the moment the sovereign's passing was announced, palace gates might be closed to outsiders and messengers dispatched to inform senior officials and regional governors. Mourning periods could last from weeks to months, during which palace staff were expected to adhere to strict behavioral codes. In China, attendants might wear plain clothing, forego jewelry, and refrain from music or festive gatherings, sometimes even altering their diet as a mark of respect. In the Ottoman Empire, court life slowed dramatically to accommodate funeral rites, prayers, and the enthronement of the successor. Music was silenced, processions were somber, and access to the new ruler was tightly controlled. During this time, the positions of male concubines were reviewed in formal councils or behind closed doors. Some were reassigned to serve junior princes or royal widows, effectively removing them from the political center. Others were retired with stipends and sent to comfortable but remote residences. In certain cases, they were offered minor administrative posts in provincial palaces. Yet the process also created opportunities for political rivals to accuse them of past misdeeds, ranging from corruption to alleged betrayal, often leading to trials, public humiliation, or forced exile. In volatile courts, these accusations could be fabricated to eliminate a rival faction, meaning the mourning period was as much a time of political maneuvering as it was of grief. Perhaps one of the starkest examples comes from the Yuan dynasty in China, under Mongol rule. Contemporary and later records describe how certain emperors, upon their deaths, left behind attendants whose roles were so bound to their person that transferring them to another master was considered improper or even dangerous. Their duties and knowledge were seen as belonging exclusively to the deceased ruler. In some documented cases, these attendants were ordered to follow the emperor in death, either through ritual execution or by being buried alongside him. This practice, though shocking to later observers, was not unique to the Yuan. It echoed far older traditions of human sacrifice in royal burials, stretching back to early Chinese dynasties, ancient Persia, and nomadic cultures such as the Scythians. While by the medieval period such customs were far less common and often limited to symbolic gestures, the underlying belief that loyal service should extend into the afterlife persisted in the ceremonial imagination of the court. Accounts suggest that this command could be framed as an honor, with chosen attendants given special funerary rites, but it also functioned as a means of ensuring sensitive knowledge died with them. This dual motive, ritual loyalty and political security, made the practice particularly telling about the intersection of belief and power. In the Ottoman context, while such direct executions were rare in later centuries, the abrupt and unexplained disappearance of certain court favorites after a sultan's death raises similar questions. European diplomats in Istanbul sometimes wrote cautiously about the removal of unnecessary elements in the palace during transitions of power. Such language was deliberately vague, almost certainly masking harsher measures designed to erase lingering influence from the old reign and to secure the new ruler's position. When we compare across empires, patterns emerge. In almost every case, the male concubine's survival depended on two factors: the stability of succession and the goodwill of the new ruler. Where succession was orderly, such as in some Qing transitions, attendants might retire peacefully. Where it was contested, as in certain Abbasid or Ottoman changes, their lives could be cut short. Over time, these practices influenced court structures. Later rulers often reduced the number of personal attendants to limit such risks. In cultural memory, these figures became symbols of both intimacy with power and its dangers, appearing in literature, plays, and folklore. The fate of male concubines after an emperor's death reveals a great deal about the nature of power in historical courts. It underscores the reality that proximity to a ruler was both the highest honor and a profound risk. In life, these men could wield influence far beyond their official titles. In death, their patron's absence could leave them exposed. Case studies from Baghdad to Beijing illustrate the repeated pattern of rise and fall tied to the throne's occupant. Comparing these fates across regions reveals both common patterns of precaution and unique cultural expressions of loyalty and control. In modern retellings, the focus often falls on the women of the harem, yet the stories of these male figures remind us that palace life was a complex web of relationships, each governed by loyalty, suspicion, and the constant need to navigate shifting alliances. Primary accounts, whether from Al-Tabari, Ming court memorials, or Ottoman ambassadorial reports, bring these long, quiet voices closer to us. Ultimately, their experiences illustrate a timeless truth. In any system built around a single central figure, the fall of that figure sends ripples through every layer of the structure. For the male concubines of imperial courts, those ripples could be fatal. The historical record, patchy though it is, preserves enough to tell us that behind the splendor of palace walls lay a precarious existence. And when the emperor's light went out, the shadows could be long indeed.